Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're diving into the world of cloud computing or managing resources on AWS, you are on the right place. Today, we're talking about one of the most essential services that keeps your AWS environment secure, and that is Identity and Access Management, or IAM. So whether you are managing a single application or controlling a complex multi-account setup, IAM is the key to making sure only the right people and services have access to your resources and nothing more. From controlling permissions to setting up policies, this tool is your security guard for AWS. In this video, we'll break down exactly how IAM works, why it's crucial for cloud security, and we'll even go hands-on with setting up your first IAM users, roles, and policies. So whether you are just starting out or you are brushing up on best practices, stick around because this one is going to level up your AWS skills. Ready to get secure in the cloud? Let's dive in. First, let's try to understand some key concepts of IAM. So what is IAM? IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. It's a service that helps you manage access to your AWS resources securely. This service allows you to create and manage users, groups, roles, and permissions for controlling access to your AWS resources. IAM is a key component for managing security in AWS. It will make sure that the right people have the appropriate level of access to the resources they need. Now let's look at the first element of IAM service. The first one is IAM user. These are individual accounts created for people or applications that need to interact with your AWS resources. For example, you can create a user to interact with an S3 bucket on AWS. Now, each user has its own set of credentials. They can have username, password, or access keys. These users also have permissions that define what action they can perform in your AWS environment. For example, a user can have a permission to create a bucket in S3. Now, to perform an action depends on something called a policy. Now, policies are documents written in JSON, and these policies define what actions are allowed or denied for specific AWS resources. So a policy determines the permissions for users, groups, or roles. Let's look at a very simple example of an IAM policy. This IAM policy allows a user to perform a specific action on Amazon S3 bucket. So let me break it down for you so we can understand what we are talking about here. Now first we have version, which specifies the policy language version. Next we have statement element. This defines the specific permissions or rules within the policy. In this case, there is one statement, but you can have multiple statements, right? Now, next here we have effects. Now, this specifies whether the policy allows or denies the specific actions, right? So here the effect is allow, meaning that the policy permits or allows the action to happen, right? So the action here is to allow a S3 put object. So this means that the policy allows the user to upload or write an object to an S3 bucket. Now resource specifies the particular AWS resources to which this policy applies. So in our case here we have ARN, which is Amazon resource name. Now this refers to all objects inside this S3 bucket named my bucket, right? Now, in summary, this policy allows the user to perform the put object action, meaning to upload or add an object to any object within the S3 bucket named my bucket. Now, the key points to remember here is that this allows uploading object, not deleting or reading, just uploading. Then it applies to all objects within the specified S3 bucket. In our case here, it's my bucket, right? Now let's look at the second element of IAM, which is IAM groups. These are a collection of users, and you can assign permissions to a group, and all the users in that group will inherit those permissions. For example, you can have a group of audit team, a group of developers, and DevOps. Now, once you assign permission to a group of DevOps, those permissions will apply to all the users within that group. Now, this simplifies management by allowing you to assign the same set of permissions to multiple users at once. Now, let's look at the next element here. The next element here is IAM role. IAM role is an identity that you can assume to gain temporary access to AWS resources. Unlike IAM users, IAM roles do not have permanent credentials like an access key. Instead, they provide temporary security credentials that allow users to perform specific action on AWS resources. So roles are often used to grant user access to other resources without the need for access keys. For example, you can grant a temporary access to an S3 bucket or an EC2 instance or Lambda without an access key. Let's look at an example of an EC2 instance role. You can assign a role to an EC2 instance to allow it to interact with other AWS services. For example, an EC2 instance can use a role to access S3 buckets or DynamoDB table without needing to store access keys on the instance. Now, before we dive into the AWS Management Console, let's try to understand what we are going to create. Now, here we're inside the AWS account. Then we have the IAM service. First, we have to create a user, and then we can name this user Thomas, and we can attach a policy to that user. The next use case is to create a group of users. So we can create a group of admins. Here we have Thomas and Benit, and we can assign a policy to this group. And as I mentioned, these two users will inherit the same policy. Now next we have groups. Then we can have groups of developers and DevOps and attach a policy to it. And then the users will inherit the same policy. Next is to create a role. Now we can give a temporary access to this role to perform an action in S3 bucket. Now let's head over to the console. Alright, the first step is to log into your AWS Management Console. If you don't have an account yet and you need to know how to create one, check out the video linked above. Now once you're logged in, follow along with me. Now from the AWS Management Console, type IAM into the search bar and then select IAM. Alright, here we are in the IAM dashboard where you can access and manage all your IAM resources. Now, just as a quick note, as you can see here, multi-factor authentication or MFA is enabled to this root user. And it is a best practice to enable MFA to both your root user and your IAM users. So if you want to know how to enable MFA to your account to improve security, check out the video linked above. Now, if you scroll down to IAM resources, as you can see here, we don't have any groups, we don't have any users. Here there is two default roles, but we can add one. And there is no policies. Now let's create a new user. In the left-hand menu, select users. Click on users. Now here, we don't have any user. Let's create one. Click on create user. Now here under user details, let's enter a username. I'm going to enter Thomas as an example. Now, provide user access to the AWS Management Console. I'm going to show you how to enable this later. For now, let's scroll down and select next. Now, under set permissions, select the first option, which is add user to group. And then scroll down, leave this as default and select next. Now, next we have to review the user. As you can see, we just have the username and we don't have any password and we don't have any permissions. Now, I'm going to show you how to enable that later. For now, just scroll down and click on create user. Now the user has been successfully created. Here we have Thomas. Now click on View User. Now first we have the ARN, which is Amazon Resource Name. Now this ID belongs to this particular user, and it's always going to be unique for any resources that this user is going to use inside AWS, right? Now as you can see here, the console access is disabled, which means that this user is not able to access the AWS Management Console. And as you can see here, we are still logged in as the root user. Now let's try to enable this user to access the AWS Management Console as the IAM user. Now to do that, scroll down and select Security Credentials. Then click on Enable Console Access. Now to enable console access for this user, we have to create a password. You can either choose auto-generated password or a custom password. I'm going to choose custom password. I'm going to enter my password here. And then I'll choose enable console access. All right, now we have successfully enabled the password for this user. As you can see, we have the console sign-in URL. We're going to use this URL to log in into the console. Then we have the username and the password. And you can also download this CSV file and keep these credentials somewhere safe. Now let's try and log in to the AWS console using this IAM user. Now copy this URL. Now I'm going to open into a Cognito window. Now let's try to log in into the console using the new IAM user. I'm going to enter the username, Thomas, and then the password, and then click sign in. All right, now we have logged in into the console using the new IAM user. As you can see, this is a fresh console, and if you click here, we are logged in as an IAM user. And as a best practice, it's strongly recommended to use your IAM user to log in into your account for security purposes. All right. Now, before we proceed, let's try and use some of the AWS services with this new user and see what's going to happen. So let's create, for example, an S3 bucket. So I'm going to click on S3. Now, as you can see, here, the message says that you don't have permission to list buckets. Now, what this means is that once you create an IAM user in AWS, by default, AWS doesn't provide any access to this particular user. So the new user that we just created cannot interact with any AWS resources. So what we need to do here is to create a permission policy so that this user can access the resources in AWS, right? Now let's configure the IAM user permissions. Now first, go back to your root user, then search for IAM. On the IAM dashboard, in the left-hand menu, click on Policies. Now here is a list of default policies created by AWS. You can either attach existing policy directly from this list, or you can create a new policy. Now let's create a new one. So click on Create Policy. Now to create a policy, you can use the Visual UI. Here you can select the service and then add permissions. Or you can use the JSON format to see the code and edit as you wish. Now let's edit this policy. Here you're going to enter the statement ID. I'm going to enter allow S3 access. Then the effect is allow, which is correct. Then the action is S3 column, then star. Now for resources, let's just put star. Now check for errors. If there is none, scroll down and click next. Now enter the policy name. I'm going to enter IAM user policy. Enter a description if needed. Now here on the permissions, you can see that the user has full access to S3 as we stated in the JSON file. Now for tags, you can add any tags if necessary, then click Create Policy. All right, now the policy has been created. Now next we need to assign this policy to the IAM user so that the user can have full access to S3. Now go back to your root user, search for IAM, then choose Users. Under Permission, click on Add Permissions. Then click Add Existing Policy directly. And then select the policy that we just created. You can search for it in the search bar here. Now here we can see we have IAM policy. Now scroll down and then click Next. Now to review here, you can see we have the username, the permission attached to it. Now finally, click on Add Permissions. Now that we have granted the user the permission, let's go back to the IAM user console. Once you're here, refresh the page and you'll see this error disappear. Now you can see the user has full access to S3. Now you can easily create an S3 bucket or see a list of existing buckets. All right, now that you know how to create users, the next step is to create groups. Now, groups is just a way to organize users. Right. Now, to create a group, now click on User Groups in the left-hand menu. We don't have any groups here. Let's go ahead and create one. Click on Create Group. Enter a group name. For example, I'm going to write a group of admins. Now scroll down. Here we need to add users to this group. I've created 3 more users. You can go ahead and do that. I'm going to select, for example, Thomas, Benit, and then Cecile. Now we need to attach policies to this group. For example, we'll attach administrator access to this group. Now I'm going to select that. Scroll down and then click Create Group. Now the group have been created, and if you click on users, you can see we have a total of 3 users inside this group. Now if you click on View Group, again inside this group of admins we have 3 users. Now if you want to add a permission to this group, click on Add Permissions tab. Remember that this policy we have attached to this group, and you can also add other permissions. By the way, if you are finding this helpful, I will really appreciate you hitting that like button, share with more people, and also consider subscribing. Now, finally, let's create roles. Now, as I mentioned, a role is just a way to delegate access to users, applications, and services, right? So let's create a role. Back in your IAM dashboard, click on Roles in the left-hand menu. Now here we have 2 default roles that were created with this account. Now let's create one. Click on Create Role. Now we are going to create a role for an EC2 instance. Now for that, select AWS Service. Now for the service, choose EC2. Now scroll down and click Next. Now for permissions, attach the necessary policies. For example, we're going to attach something like Amazon S3 read-only access. You can search for it here, then select it, and then click Next. Now here, enter the name of the role. I'm going to enter S3 read-only access. Then here we have the default trust policy. As you can see here, we have the effect is allow. The action is assume role. Then the service is EC2. Then here we have the added permissions. For tags, add any tags if necessary and click Create Role. Now the role is created. You can see we have the role here, S3 read-only access. Now, to use this role, what you need to do is to assign this role to a service. For example, you can assign it to an EC2 instance. Now, let me show you how to do that. To assign the role to an EC2 instance, go to your EC2 dashboard. I'm going to show you how to create an EC2 instance in another video. Now, select an instance. I have one here, test. Then click on Actions, then Security, and then click on Modify IAM Role. Now here select the role that you just created, which is this one, and then click Update IAM Role. And that's how you assign a role to an EC2 instance. And that's it, guys. You have successfully created users, groups, and roles using AWS IAM. By properly managing IAM, you can ensure that your AWS environment is secure and well organized. Now, if you find this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.